This talk questions the orthodoxy of performing with mixing desks, amps and speakers, and suggests a truly electronic music born from minimal resources, and where the relationship between electricity and sound are examined at a fundamental level. It's also part workshop with some practical examples. Now, you might recognise the format of the title of this talk. I've borrowed it from Fiona Watt and Rachel Wells and their book series That's Not My ... The books are tactile sensory books for toddlers, with each page having a repetitive motif, that's not my ... and a response. For example, that's not my hedgehog, its paws are too soft. That's not my hedgehog, its nose is too shiny. The books take the reader on a journey to find the exact, for example, right hedgehog, something that the reader identifies with, their hedgehog. That's my hedgehog, its back is so prickly. In the early 1990s, with the arrival of the Mackie 1202, small portable mixing desks became central to the performance of electronic music. For example, at Stime Studio of Electro-Instrumental Music in Amsterdam, there was a cupboard full of them. The 1202 was also at the heart of my setup. Being the gigging, travelling musician type, these desks went through various hacks and modifications, the casing being discarded for lighter weight materials. I'm not sure these desks would have passed any electrical or PAT tests, but at least I'm still here to tell the story. Yet over time, the 1202 slowly moved to the periphery of my performance work, and more significantly, idea of instrumental setup. The desk no longer occupied the centre of the stage. After a recent performance with Tim Shaw at Cafe Oto in London, I decided enough was enough. In our performance installation, managing a mixing desk console, now I say managing because the idea of a desk or console sounds rather administrative, was becoming, in fact, unmanageable. These performance installations lean towards a diffuse sound world, each object having its own sound source, speaker and amplification, each object's sound characterized by its position in the space. We explore the relationship between these things. It's a kind of ecosystem. See Green and Waters' performance ecosystems, for example. Back to Cafe Oto, sat there on the floor in the dark. The mixer over there somewhere. What good is that? This image is with the lights on. That's not my mixer. I can't see the white tape with the channels labelled. That's not my mixer. Signals pass, cross, join and multiply. A matrix maze, abstractions. That's not my mixer. In fact, I don't need a mixer. I've never felt comfortable performing through what is often referred to as a PA, public announcement or address system. Such systems are often concerned with faithful reproduction of sound. Sound reproduction, eh? It suggests a fake or copy. In a recent article titled Against Augmentation, also with Tim Shaw, I discuss how I've prioritised thinking of amplification as an integral part of an electronic instrument rather than part of a means of the reproduction of sound, and how I avoid in-house PA systems in my performance. In smaller venues, this is wise indeed, for as Anuradha Das has said, we are often confronted with speakers on sticks, those horrible mid-range mid-frequency, plastic moulded speaker things that make everything sound like shit. Then on larger stages, the performer is often left to the whim of the sound engineer and on-stage monitoring. Are you in control of your sound? Can you hear what you're doing? And if you can hear yourself, it won't be the same as the audience. There are sound diffusion systems, of course, and at least here, the loudspeaker is carefully considered for its characteristics and instrumental quality. Think orchestra of loudspeakers and the acousmonium, for example. I want to focus on what might be thought of as a chamber aesthetic in electronic music. I've been thinking about this for a while. In fact, I presented a paper way back in 1999 on the subject. Now, I'm not thinking string quartets here, but the fundamental principles of chamber music. Smaller, intimate performance spaces. No big stages. Discrete sound sources. Idiosyncrasies and nuance of individual sounds. Audience and performers up close. That's not my PA, it's too big. That's not my PA, I can't hear my sound. That's not my PA, the sound is coming from over there. We've already come to the conclusion that my mixer no longer exists as a desk or console, but exists through the positioning and balancing of discrete sound sources in a performance ecosystem, or what I refer to as a mesh-like structure where sonic wayfaring takes place. I don't really want to think of electronic sound as channeling, routing and directing signals through complex labyrinths. I want to find the most direct route, visceral, immediate way of exploring technological sound. I've railed against the fundamental idea of mapping data. Things are lost in translation, and adding layers and layers of sound and or processes only leads to dilution. Yes, I'm interested in reductionism. There's not enough time to go into this in more detail here, but in times of crisis, this seems particularly pertinent when resources in general are becoming scarce and more expensive. So much of my recent work explores making sound with raw current. My good friend and collaborator, John Bowers, has done some important work in this area. There's the Victorian synthesizer, a synthesizer made from a loudspeaker, battery and crocodile test cables. It's Victorian in that the battery and electromagnetic induction were products of the 19th century, and the Victorians could have made sound exploiting these. Bowers' Victorian synthesizer is outlined in some detail in Nicholas Collins's Hardware Hacking for Musicians. Here's an example of the principle of the Victorian synthesizer. We're using a 9-volt battery here. Connect the crocodile test cables to the terminals of the loudspeaker. Then connect one of the cables to the battery. It doesn't matter which terminal at this stage. Now, if we momentarily touch the other crocodile test cable to the free battery terminal, the speaker should move, either up or down, and make a click. The movement of the speaker will depend on the way in which we've connected the cables, the polarity of the connection. A positive flow of current will move the speaker up, negative down. The battery only provides DC, direct current, current in one direction only. The loudspeaker is designed for AC alternating current that changes direction periodically, a positive and negative current. Think sine tone. The speaker sits at a resting point, 0 volts, and is forced up positive and down negative by the current. So we are only getting movement in one direction here. In this case, a positive current. Up only, but it still makes a sound. I've set my metronome to crotchet equals 60 as a reference, and I'm switching the current on periodically once per second. That's 1 hertz, 1 cycle per second. If I could do this super fast, say 440 times a second, I'd have concert A, the pitch the orchestra tunes to. I can't physically do this, but I can use the wonders of technology to help me switch faster. But of course, this principle can be further explored and extended through the idea of the mechanical oscillator, where the speaker's own movement can be used to turn the current on and off. I've continued to work on this. There's the Victorian synthesizer Mark I, Mark II, Mark III. And things that generate current and directly connecting these things to loudspeakers. One particular application of this is motor music, a series of pieces, ongoing experiments into making music through generating current with motors and connecting these motors directly to speakers. When the shaft of a motor is turned, current is generated. We can use this current, as discussed in relation to switching and the battery, to create sound with a speaker. The speed and method of turning the shaft is critical in the resulting sound, the gesture itself. I've appropriated different motors and devices for different results. The clicker or worker bee is made from a simple relay, an electrical switch found in many appliances. Inside the relay there is an electromagnetic and spring-loaded switch. When power is applied to the coil of the electromagnet, it flips the switch and generates a clicking sound. By connecting power to the electromagnet through the switch, we can create a feedback loop, which causes the relay to oscillate. The frequency of the oscillation can be set with a capacitor. The larger the value of the capacitor, the longer it takes to charge and discharge, and the slower the relay oscillates. To increase the frequency of the oscillation, you can make the value of the capacitor smaller. These clickers have an acoustic property and can be amplified through placement on resonant objects. Here's an example of a collection of them with different size capacitors. There's more that can be done and further explored. What about a circuit to convert DC to AC, offsetting the waveform, wave shaping, or clock dividers to create different frequencies from the switching circuits? Many of the speakers that I use have been reclaimed from car breakers and scrapyards. And these speakers get well used and abused. I call them my Frankenstein speakers. Speaker cones ripped and torn that have been repaired using tissue paper and PVA glue. This also brings us to loudspeaker preparations, using acoustic objects placed on the cone of the loudspeaker. My favourites include buttons and bottle tops. Then resonant objects can also be used to filter the sound and to create mechanical oscillator-driven percussion. We have things that jump and resonate. Using the speaker drivers alone, without cabinets, points towards the exploration of transduction, placing speakers on surfaces as a way to find acoustic resonance and amplification. This type of loudspeaker use becomes site-dependent, drawing on materials at hand. It's almost feasible, without the weight of the cabinets, to carry a collection of speakers to performances. To finish, here is a rehearsal and devising session for a collaborative piece with Japanese composer Makoto Nomura. The finished work can be heard in tonight's concert. Okay, Makoto, so this, we can also move the CD drive with a battery, for example, Sam. I'm touching a battery, let's just try that again. Push it in, Sam. And touch it with a battery. It moves out. So there's a nice possibility here of a sort of push-pull between two players. So Sam can also play. And the battery also produces a nice little click, which can be prepared, Neil, can't it, with a tin? Do you want to get a tin? So this sound well becomes a lot more complex. So you've got this fight. Remove the tin. That one's nice actually, let's keep that one, just one tin, yeah. So it's electronic and acoustic.
John, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Theo. Good morning.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for a fantastic window on your work. It is always superb. Thank you so much for that. I'm not seeing questions in the chat, so I'm going to fire away myself. This feels like last year, actually, you know. We've been here before. Concerning individual compositions or works, in your creative output, your musical output, do you think in terms of creating compositions, or are they is your work installation based, or do you rely on improvisation? Solely rely on improvisation? How does that work?
Well, I'm not sure it does. Ever since I became a doctor of music composition, I've resisted using the term composer. Now, I love composing, but of course, the term composition has strings attached, lots of baggage associated with it. And as a musician, artist, I would be more than happy devising work with others, improvising. The idea of authorship as well comes into this.
Yes.
Yeah, the single author. And in many music traditions, you know, the idea of the single author is not that common, actually. So
Yes.
in many ways, this the oral tradition, if you like, of passing on sounds and improvising always appealed to me. So although it has been a conscious decision to avoid the term composer, I try not to beat myself up about it. Yeah, this is a discussion that's been going on pretty much all of my life. And it's quite interesting to see other people defend me as a sonic artist or a composer or an improviser. It's probably career suicide in that nobody can quite decide. But nevertheless, I have to be bold and courageous and commit myself to neither of these and just create music that I feel is rewarding.
Yes, yes. Well, I would like to say I think it works on all levels. I think you really your music, your art speaks to me on many different levels. From another perspective, are you part of an ensemble, or do you pretty much operate as an individual artist who then is contacted to do workshops, installations, etc.? How does that fit together?
Well, being the composer would, in general, involve a lot of working in isolation. And I think one of the reasons to avoid that is the social aspect, particularly in the realms of technology and computer music. I would spend hours, well, I still do spend hours peering into a computer screen.
Sure.
It's quite a lonely pursuit. And certainly making music with other people did become also a conscious decision, something that motivated me. And there are, I suppose, a group of musicians, artists, composers who I frequently collaborate with. But it's not like a rock band where there is a dedicated ensemble. Right. So that gives a certain fluidity to the makeup of it. And even when I'm sometimes booked to perform solo, I would often pull in somebody who I met in the afternoon, and suddenly they're involved in the performance as well, whether that's from a position of holding something or some more involved aspect of the performance. I often cite Claire Bishop, who's written about participation within the arts and this idea of the delegated performer. Yeah, with that performer or artist is truly authentic. They've had no time to prepare. They don't necessarily have any preconceptions, and they are pretty much like a blank canvas. So there's some real advantage in working with people you've never played with before and people you can literally pull out of the audience. I mean, that said, though, I have also avoided audience participation. I'll, in general, like to focus with a group of like-minded people. Right. So that does require some prep time, shall we say, where you discuss ideas and think about approaches or whether you have some kind of mutual understanding of what could happen, rather than anything can go, because, you know, where can that lead?
Right. Sure. Wonderful. There is a question in the chat. I'll read it if you just bear with me. John said, you are neither composer, improviser, etc. And this person just wanted to know, to what extent does the notion of concept or idea inform how you prepare or present your music?
Yes, so quite often, well, a typical sort of commission, if you like, for me, would be a festival would get in touch with me and say they would like an event of some kind. Now, I've managed to think about events as being more than just concerts, because after all, doing a concert can be quite short. Yeah, you're on stage,
Yeah.
20 minutes, half an hour, if you're lucky, 2 hours, and the
Yeah.
concert's over. I much more enjoy developing relationships with people in a particular locality or local artists. So that might involve working with a group for 2 or 3 days. I think the longest I've done is possibly 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
So I will work with a festival, and often conceptually there would be some kind of theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, at the Sapporo International Arts Festival in Japan, it was a collaborative piece with sound artist Kanta Horio, but we had this idea to make sound devices in a very dark room where there were no lights. So the participants could only make their sound devices through finding and assembling things simply through the process of touch. And we also developed some kind of wind device which you blew into, which then did also power some lighting at the same time. So the whole concept, if you like, of that piece, the sounds, the way in which the sound making materials were created, started from quite an early concept and a discussion. So some of these works, if you like, do exist as compositions or artworks, but the composition or the artwork is multifaceted. It includes a performance or an instrument.
Yeah.
So if you look at Dirty Electronics, my website, some of the works are physical objects that have been commissioned, which then become the kind of composition in their own right. So the object can take on some kind of work quality.
Right, right. If I can jump in using this keyword, the object, the examples we saw during the film presentation, if I'm not mistaken, mostly involved relatively, small physical objects, which to me would say, it would imply that in terms of the frequency range of sounds that you can generate with these objects, one is slightly limited. But have you explored playing a room, a large event or a large venue?
Yes, I mean, that's one of the trade-offs, one of the negatives. I mean, I love bass.
Yeah.
In this particular example, there wasn't a bass transducer. So quite often I take bass shakers, as they're called, which you can place on the floor to get some kind of extra bass within the room.
Yeah.
However, if I want to use some kind of bass or extend my frequency range,
Right.
I have to make a compromise in terms of the resource, in terms of using a sound system that I'm not familiar with. So it's a trade-off between having the full spectrum, as I've discussed, this idea of a chamber approach where you get the full orchestra, if you like, versus something that's limited.
Right.
So although it pains me to be working with a particular sound, a small sound, I'm prepared for that trade-off, because that gives me greater freedom artistically and actually sonically. It might be a small, limited sound, but I'm in control of that sound.
Yes, yes.
One thing I have done where I've slightly cheated, where I've gone against my principles, is I've sometimes used just used the bass in a sound system.
Okay.
So you get a dynamic. Then you've got some kind of more enveloping or dynamic in terms of frequency to move between. And another common thing that I often do is do that in the interval. So all of the small sounds encourage the audience up close, and then when the interval happens, the PA is switched up to 100, and and some kind of generative sound circuit is switched on. Okay. So the complete opposite. The performance is void of performers, and it's very loud. So maybe that's my little intro. So I do at times try and engage, if you like, with a full spectrum of sounds. Right. And it takes a lot of discipline to say, I'm not going to use your Genelec speakers. Yeah, okay. I'd really love to, but I'm not going to do it.
Wow, wonderful. You haven't toured Africa, have you?
No, well, hopefully, as you know, last year was interesting, having the opportunity to work a little bit with Afro Rack
Yes.
in Uganda, and
Yeah.
eventually we were able to discuss some of the work that we do. Now, interestingly, I've mainly been to Asia quite a lot.
Okay.
So China, Japan. I'm going to Japan in November for an extended tour there, which is with John Bowers, who I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So Japan has been a frequent location, and all throughout Europe and America and other places, but not
Right.
Africa. And so this is a really, yeah, you could argue this is a big problem, if you like, with a lot of European-centered music. That, you know, Africa, we need to engage more with Africa.
Well, we are committed, and I'm convinced, utterly convinced. It's a question of just a little bit more planning. I'm convinced that we shall build this bridge between yourself, your art, and the University of Cape Town. John, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It is much appreciated. Take care.
Bye.